Daniel had been through many battles in his life, but nothing felt like this. Smoke covered the broken field, and the ground shook under the distant thunder of weapons. The war between humans and the alien kingdom had dragged on for years, each side losing lives but gaining little. Now Daniel was separated from his unit. He had been running for hours, trying to avoid patrols, trying to find a safe place. His armor was scratched, his helmet cracked, and his energy pack almost empty. He could not even call for help because the communication system was damaged. He pressed his back against a burned tree, breathing heavy. His heart still pounded with the rhythm of survival. He thought of his fellow soldiers not knowing if they had made it out alive. He thought of his family back on Earth, people who might never hear from him again. For a moment he closed his eyes, but a faint sound pulled him back, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the machines. It was a cry. At first, Daniel thought his mind was playing tricks. But the sound came again, soft and filled with fear. It was not the cry of a soldier. It was smaller, weaker. A child. He frowned and moved carefully toward the sound, stepping over rubble and scorched earth. The cry grew louder as he drew closer, to a pile of broken stone and metal, maybe the ruins of an alien vehicle or a shelter. He crouched and pushed aside a sharp beam. There, hidden in the shadows, was a small figure. A child. Clearly not human. The skin was pale silver, glowing faintly under the smoke-filled light. Large, dark eyes blinked up at him, filled with tears. The child's clothing was torn and one leg was pinned under a piece of metal. The child shivered, clutching something close, maybe a pendant or a piece of cloth from home. Daniel's heart tightened. This was not an enemy soldier. This was just a frightened child trapped in the middle of a war. For a moment he looked around, wondering if this was some kind of trick. But the fear in the child's eyes was too real to fake. Without thinking further, Daniel dropped his rifle to the ground and knelt beside the child. "It's okay," he whispered, though he knew the child might not understand his language. His voice was soft, careful, the kind of tone he had once used when calming his younger sister. The child whimpered, trying to pull away, but Daniel slowly pushed the metal aside. It was heavy, pressing deep into the ground, but he forced his tired muscles to work. His hands burned as sharp edges cut through his gloves, yet he did not stop. At last, with a grunt, he lifted the piece enough to free the child's leg. The child winced in pain but tried to stand. Daniel quickly caught them before they could fall. He checked the leg. It was not broken, but it was badly bruised. The child would not be able to run. Daniel sighed, knowing what this meant. If enemy patrols came, carrying the child would slow him down. But he also knew he could not walk away. He reached into his pack, finding a small water tube. He offered it gently. The child hesitated, then took a sip, coughing a little but drinking gratefully. A quiet trust began to form, fragile but real. Suddenly, sharp voices echoed in the distance. Alien soldiers were moving through the area. Daniel's body went tense. He quickly lifted the child into his arms, pressing close to the shadows. He could see 3 alien warriors scanning the wreckage, their armor shining under the dim light. They were searching for survivors, or maybe for the child itself. Daniel held his breath, keeping the child quiet against his chest. He could feel the child's small hands gripping his armor, trembling but silent. The soldiers passed close, one of them stopping only a few steps away. Daniel's hand moved slowly toward his sidearm, but he knew if he fired, they would both be dead. Luck was with him this time. After a moment, the soldiers moved on, their voices fading into the smoke. Only then did Daniel let out the breath he had been holding. He whispered softly, "We need to move." The child did not answer, but the way they clung to him was enough. He started walking, careful to stay low and avoid open ground. Every step was harder with the child in his arms, but he refused to slow down. The child rested its head against his chest, eyes closing, maybe from exhaustion. Daniel looked at the small alien face and felt something stir inside him. A reminder that war was not only about soldiers and battles. It was about lives caught in between. Hours seemed to pass as he carried the child through the ruins, searching for a safe place. At last, he found the remains of an old bunker. The door was half broken, but inside it was quiet, hidden from the patrols above. Daniel placed the child gently on a blanket from his pack, then sat beside them, his back against the wall. He gave the child another sip of water and a small piece of ration. The child ate slowly, watching him with wide eyes. Daniel tried to smile, though his face was tired. "You're safe now," he said, even if neither of them fully believed it yet. The child reached out, touching the scar on Daniel's cheek. The gesture was simple, innocent, yet powerful. Daniel froze for a moment, then allowed it. The child's touch was not one of fear, but of thanks. In that silence, a bond was formed, a bond stronger than the war raging outside. As night fell, and the battlefield grew quiet, Daniel stayed awake, guarding the child. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He only knew that he had made a choice to protect this life no matter the cost. And somewhere in the distance, unseen by him, the act was already being noticed. For the child he had saved was no ordinary child, and the queen who searched for her heir would soon hear of the human who had risked everything. The battlefield had taken many things from Daniel, but tonight it had given him something unexpected: hope. Daniel woke early the next morning, his eyes heavy but his senses sharp. The small alien child still slept beside him, curled up in the blanket he had offered. For a moment the bunker felt strangely peaceful, the silence broken only by the soft breathing of the little one. Yet outside these cracked walls the world was still burning. He leaned his head back and thought about his next step. His unit was gone, his communicator was broken, and he had no clear path back to human lines. The only thing that was clear was the child. Daniel could not leave them here. He had promised, even if only to himself, that he would protect this little life. By mid-morning the child stirred awake. Their large dark eyes blinked up at him, cautious but calmer than yesterday. Daniel handed them some water. The child sipped quietly, then whispered something in their own alien tongue. Daniel did not understand the words, but the soft tone carried meaning. Gratitude. He smiled faintly. "You're welcome," he said, even knowing the child could not understand him either. Still, the bond between them had grown. But that fragile calm was broken. Outside, heavy steps echoed on the ground, followed by the sound of a loud horn. Daniel froze. It was not the sound of patrols searching randomly. It was a call, a signal. Soon after, deep voices rose together, chanting words Daniel could not understand. The child's face lit up with sudden recognition. Their small hands gripped Daniel's sleeve, pulling toward the sound. Daniel frowned, trying to piece it together. The soldiers were not calling for battle. They were calling for something else, someone. Moments later, the air grew thick with tension. Shadows moved outside the bunker, and a group of alien warriors appeared at the entrance. Their armor was darker and heavier than the patrols from before. They carried banners marked with strange symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were royal guards. Daniel quickly stood, placing himself between the child and the warriors. His heart beat hard, his hand hovering near his weapon, though he knew he was no match for so many. The child clutched his arm tighter, whispering more urgently now. The guards did not attack. Instead, they parted, and a tall figure stepped through. She was regal, her presence commanding the ruined space as if it were her throne. Her long gown flowed like liquid metal, and a crown of black crystal rested on her head. Her eyes were sharp, glowing faintly like fire behind glass. This was no ordinary leader. This was Queen Serenia. Daniel's breath caught. He had heard stories about her. The alien queen whose armies had pushed back human fleets, whose voice could silence whole halls. She was said to be ruthless, a ruler who bowed to no one. And now she stood only steps away from him. Her gaze fell first on the child. Relief flashed across her face, quick but unmistakable. Then her eyes turned to Daniel. They narrowed, studying him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. One of the guards spoke in their alien language, explaining quickly, pointing to Daniel, and then to the child. The queen listened, her face unreadable. At last she raised a hand, silencing the guard. She stepped closer. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but powerful. "You, human," she said, the word rolling strangely on her tongue but clear enough for him to understand. "You saved the heir." Daniel blinked. The heir. His chest tightened as realization struck. The child he had carried, fed, and protected was not just any child. They were royal blood. The queen's own flesh and blood. That explained why the HFY soldiers had been searching so fiercely. For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Daniel stood tense, not knowing what to say. He expected anger, maybe punishment. Surely no alien queen would accept a human soldier touching her heir. But instead, Serenya's gaze softened slightly. "You carried my child from death," she said. Her voice was still stern, but there was weight in her words. "Why?" Daniel swallowed hard. His voice came quiet, steady. "Because they needed me. No one else was there." The queen tilted her head, studying him as though his answer was a riddle. Around them, the guards shifted uneasily. Many of them clearly disliked his presence, their eyes sharp with distrust. But the child broke the heavy mood. They stumbled forward, ignoring the guards, and wrapped their arms around Daniel's leg. The queen's eyes widened at the sight. A human soldier, embraced so freely by her heir. Whispers broke out among the guards, shock and disapproval echoing in their language. Daniel bent down, gently patting the child's back. Serenya raised a hand, silencing the whispers. She looked at Daniel once more. "You will come with me," she declared. "The court will see the one who carried my blood to safety." Daniel stiffened. He had little choice. To refuse would mean death. To go with her meant stepping deeper into a world he did not belong. Yet when the child tugged his arm again, he found himself nodding. The guards formed a circle around them, leading him through the ruined battlefield. As they walked, alien soldiers bowed their heads to the queen, their eyes flicking to Daniel with confusion or open hostility. He could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their silence. Still, he kept his head high, holding the child's small hand as they moved. Soon they reached a massive vessel, its dark hull shining with shifting colors like oil on water. It rose high above the ruins, a ship of royal design. Daniel hesitated as the gates opened, but the queen stepped forward without pause, and he followed. Inside, the halls were vast, carved with alien symbols and glowing lights that pulsed like living veins. Guards lined the walls, bowing as the queen passed. Daniel felt out of place, every step echoing his difference. Yet the child stayed close to him, as though he were the only safe anchor in this storm of power. Finally, they entered a chamber that could only be a throne room. Tall pillars rose like stone giants, and a great seat carved from black crystal stood at the center. The queen moved to her throne and sat, her gown flowing around her like molten silver. The guards took their places along the walls, their eyes never leaving Daniel. She gestured toward him. "This human," she announced in her own tongue, her voice booming through the chamber. "He carried the heir from death. He placed his life between danger and my blood." The nobles gathered in the room gasped. Some shouted in protest, their voices sharp with disbelief. Others whispered, their eyes wide with shock. A human soldier, protector of the heir? Impossible. Daniel felt the tension pressing against him. He knew he was standing on dangerous ground. One wrong word, one wrong move, and he might not leave this chamber alive. The queen raised her hand again, silencing the noise. Her eyes locked on him, burning with questions. "You will be tested," she said firmly. "The court will see your worth. If you are truly what you claim, then no voice will deny it. But if you are not..." She let the words hang in the air, sharp as a blade. Daniel straightened his shoulders, meeting her gaze without fear. "Then test me," he said simply. The queen studied him for another long moment. Then, for the first time, the corner of her lips curved upward, the shadow of a smile. The chamber filled again with whispers, the storm of voices rising louder. Daniel stood in the center, the air clinging to his side while the queen watched him like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He had entered her world not by choice, but by fate, and there was no turning back. The court would test him. The queen would judge him, and his future, perhaps even humanity's, now balanced on the fragile bond between a soldier, a child, and a queen, who had begun to see him not as an enemy, but as something else. Daniel stood in the center of the throne chamber, surrounded by walls of dark crystal and eyes that watched him with open suspicion. The queen's words still echoed in his ears. He would be tested. Around him, alien nobles whispered in their strange tongue, voices sharp with doubt. He did not need to understand the words to know what they meant. Untrustworthy, outsider, human. The child clung to his side, holding his arm with small, trembling hands. That touch alone kept him steady. He could feel their trust in him, fragile, yet unshaken. Daniel had survived many trials as a soldier, but none like this. He was not only fighting for his own life now, he was fighting for the bond between him and the small heir. Queen Serenia rose from her throne. Her presence silenced the chamber instantly. She looked down at Daniel, her eyes calm but commanding. "You will face 3 trials," she declared. "Trials of strength, truth, and loyalty. If you pass, no one shall question your place beside the heir. If you fail..." She let the silence finish the sentence. Daniel bowed his head slightly. "I accept." His voice was firm. The first trial began at once. The guards led him from the chamber into a wide arena, carved deep into the ship's heart. Torches of pale blue light burned on the walls, casting shadows across the smooth floor. Nobles filled the seats above, murmuring eagerly. They wanted to see him break. They wanted proof that humans were weak. A gate opened, and from it stepped a massive warrior clad in heavy armor. The alien towered over Daniel, holding a staff that crackled with energy. The crowd cheered. This was no simple test. It was a battle designed to humiliate him. Daniel's heart pounded, but he did not let fear show. He had no weapon but a simple training blade the guards had thrown to him. It felt light, fragile against the armored bulk of his opponent. Still, he gripped it tight. The queen's voice rang out. "Trial of strength, begin." The warrior charged, the ground shaking under each step. Daniel dodged to the side, rolling across the floor as the staff struck where he had been standing. Sparks flew. The crowd roared. Daniel breathed steady. He could not fight head-on. He would be crushed. Instead, he relied on speed. He moved quickly, dodging each heavy strike, letting the alien grow frustrated. The crowd jeered, shouting that the human was a coward. But Daniel knew this was the only way. At last he saw an opening. The warrior raised the staff high, leaving his side exposed. Daniel rushed forward, driving his blade against the armor. It did not pierce deep, but it struck with enough force to stagger the warrior. The alien stumbled, and the crowd gasped. Again, and again. Daniel struck not with raw power, but with precision. Each blow chipped away at the warrior's balance. Finally, with a desperate push, Daniel drove his shoulder against the alien's chest, knocking him backward. The giant crashed to the ground with a thunderous roar. The chamber fell silent. Daniel stood over the fallen warrior, blade at the ready. But he did not strike the final blow. He simply stepped back, lowering his weapon. "I don't need to kill to prove myself," he said firmly. The queen's eyes shone with interest. The nobles whispered fiercely among themselves. Some were furious, others surprised. Serenia raised her hand. The trial of strength passed. The second trial came swiftly. Daniel was taken into a hall of mirrors, each one etched with glowing symbols. A voice filled the air, strange and heavy. "Trial of truth," it said. One by one, images formed in the mirrors. He saw himself on Earth, younger, laughing with his sister. He saw himself in training, making promises to protect his comrades. Then darker visions appeared. Memories of war, of choices he regretted, of soldiers he could not save. The voices whispered in his ears, accusing him, tempting him to deny his past. Daniel clenched his fists. His throat ached with the weight of guilt, but he did not look away. "Yes," he whispered, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I failed. I made mistakes. I could not save everyone, but I never stopped trying. I never walked away from someone who needed me." The mirrors glowed brighter, then faded into silence. The trial of truth was done. Daniel had not hidden from who he was. When he emerged, the nobles looked unsettled. Many had expected him to collapse under the weight of his own past, but instead, he had stood firm. Finally came the third trial, loyalty. Daniel was led back into the arena. This time, the heir was there too, standing in the center, their small body trembling under the eyes of the crowd. A guard held a weapon at the child's side. The queen's voice filled the hall. "The last trial is loyalty. You must choose, protect yourself or protect the heir." Daniel's blood ran cold. He understood at once. This was no simple test. It was a trap. If he turned away, the child would be struck down. If he stepped forward, he might be killed. The guard raised his weapon, the heir whimpering softly. Daniel's heart thundered in his chest. He did not hesitate. He dropped his blade and rushed forward, placing himself between the heir and the weapon. His arms spread wide, shielding the child completely. "Then strike me first," he said, his voice steady, though his chest burned with fear. The hall went silent. The guard froze, lowering his weapon. The queen's eyes softened, though only slightly. Slowly, she rose from her throne. "Enough," she said. Her voice carried through the chamber like thunder. "The trials are complete." The guard stepped back. The child clung to Daniel, tears running down their face. Daniel knelt, comforting them gently. Above, the nobles erupted into a storm of voices. Some shouted that the human was dangerous, others that he had proven more courage than many of their own. The queen silenced them with a single raised hand. She looked at Daniel with a gaze that seemed to pierce his very soul. "You have shown strength, truth, and loyalty," she said slowly. "You are no ordinary soldier. You are something my court has never seen before." Daniel bowed his head, still holding the child close. He did not feel like a hero. He felt exhausted, his body aching from the trials. But he had kept his promise. He had protected the child. That was enough. The queen's lips curved into a faint, unreadable smile. "From this day," she declared, her voice ringing like a blade, "you will stand in my court not as a prisoner, but as protector of the heir." The nobles gasped. The announcement shook the hall. A human soldier, protector of the royal bloodline, it was unheard of. Yet none could argue. The trials had spoken. Daniel stood slowly, the child's hand still clutched in his own. He looked up at the queen, meeting her sharp eyes. For the first time, he saw not only suspicion there, but something else. Respect, perhaps even curiosity. The war outside still raged, but inside this chamber, something new had begun. The days after the trials passed slowly, but with heavy meaning. Daniel was no longer treated as a prisoner. He had earned a place within the queen's court, though not everyone welcomed it. Alien nobles still glared at him whenever he entered a hall. Guards kept their distance, their eyes sharp with mistrust. Yet no one dared to question the queen's decree. He was protector of the heir now, and that title carried weight. Daniel did not care about the whispers. His focus was on the child. From morning until night, he stayed close to them, guiding them through the palace corridors, teaching them simple human words, and listening to their laughter whenever he stumbled over alien phrases. Each day, the bond between them grew stronger. The child trusted him completely, holding his hand in public even when nobles scowled. But Daniel also began to notice something else. Queen Serena herself seemed to watch him more closely. At first, he thought it was only suspicion, the watchful eye of a ruler testing the limits of her strange decision. Yet as the days passed, her gaze changed. She no longer looked at him, as an enemy, but as something she could not fully name. One evening, Daniel was called to her private chamber. The room was vast, lined with shelves of ancient texts and glowing crystals. The queen stood near a balcony, looking out at the stars that stretched endlessly beyond the palace ship. Her gown shimmered like liquid night, and her crown caught the light of distant suns. "You fought well in the trials," she said without turning. Her voice was calm, almost thoughtful. Daniel bowed slightly. "I only did what I had to do." She finally looked at him, her eyes steady. "Most would have chosen themselves over the heir. You did not." Daniel hesitated. "A child's life should never be weighed against my own. I couldn't leave them." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's engines. The queen studied him as though searching for cracks in his words, some hidden motive, but all she found was honesty. "You are not like the others, of your kind," she said softly. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "I'm just a soldier who got lost in the wrong war." Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something close. It was the first time he saw her without the full mask of a ruler. For a heartbeat, she was simply a mother who had almost lost her child. The child entered then, running to Daniel and clinging to his leg. Their small voice bubbled with excitement as they spoke in their alien tongue, pointing to the stars. Daniel crouched down, listening, even though he could not understand the words. He answered in simple human speech, his tone warm and playful. The child laughed, wrapping their arms around his neck. The queen's eyes softened as she watched. She had seen her heir smile before, but not like this, not with such light. Slowly, she stepped closer, her voice low. "They trust you more than anyone." Daniel glanced at her. "Trust is something you earn. I didn't plan it. It just happened." That night was the first of many private meetings. Sometimes Serenia asked him about Earth, about human life, about how his people raised children or how they led armies. Other times she spoke of her burdens, the endless war, the pressure of nobles, the constant fear that her people would see her compassion as weakness. Daniel listened. He did not give grand advice or promises he could not keep. He simply listened, offering the kind of quiet strength that came not from power, but from presence. Serenia found herself drawn to that. For years, she had been surrounded by generals who sought glory, advisors who sought wealth, and nobles who sought influence. But this human asked for nothing. He only gave. Their bond grew quietly, like a flame hidden from the wind. Yet not all were blind to it. Among the court, whispers spread. Quickly, some said the queen was bewitched. Others claimed the human planned to use the child to gain power. The louder the whispers grew, the more dangerous the palace became for Daniel. One night, while he walked with the child in the garden chamber, shadows moved. A group of masked figures stepped from the darkness, blades glinting faintly under the crystal lights. Daniel's body reacted at once. He pushed the child behind him, drawing the short blade he carried at his side. The assassins circled, their voices low and hateful. He could not understand the words, but the meaning was clear. The human had no place here. The first attacker lunged. Daniel blocked the strike, twisting his blade to knock the assassin back. Another came from the side, and Daniel ducked, kicking hard to send the figure sprawling. He fought fiercely, his training guiding every move, but he was outnumbered. One blade cut across his arm, burning with pain. Another strike grazed his side. Daniel gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. He had only one thought: protect the child. The heir cried out, their small hands clutching the pendant around their neck. Daniel stood firm, pushing forward, striking one assassin to the ground. The others closed in, ready to finish him. But before they could, the chamber doors burst open. Guards flooded in, their spears glowing. The assassins scattered, vanishing into the shadows. Daniel staggered, bleeding but still standing, his body shielding the child until the danger passed. Moments later, Queen Serenia herself arrived. Her eyes blazed as she saw the blood on his arm, and the child trembling against him. She rushed forward, pulling her heir into her embrace, then turned to Daniel. "You are wounded," she said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "It's nothing," Daniel replied, though his breath was heavy. "They're safe. That's what matters." Her hands trembled as she looked at him. She had seen warriors bleed before. She had seen soldiers fall without flinching. But this was different. This human had bled not for glory or duty, but for her child. She ordered the guards to carry him to the healer's wing. She stayed by his side as they treated his wounds, her presence silent but heavy with meaning. When the healers were done, she dismissed them, standing close to Daniel's bed. "You risked your life again," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "I made a promise. I'll keep it no matter what." For the first time, Serenia reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of a queen who rarely touched anyone. "You are more than protector now," she said softly. "You are part of us." Daniel did not answer. He only met her gaze, the silence between them stronger than words. From that night onward, the queen's bond with him deepened. She began to invite him not only as protector but as confidant. The child continued to cling to him as if he were family. And though danger lurked in every shadow of the court, Daniel knew he had found a place where his choices mattered more than any battlefield. Yet whispers still rose in the dark corners of the palace. Not everyone accepted him. Not everyone wanted a human so close to the throne. And soon the greatest test of loyalty would come again, one that would decide not only his fate, but the queen's as well. The palace never truly slept. Even at night, its walls glowed with the soft light of crystals, and its halls echoed with the quiet steps of guards. But on this night, there was no peace. Shadows whispered of betrayal. Whispers spread of nobles, who could not accept that a human now stood so close to the throne. Daniel felt it. He could see the cold eyes watching him whenever he walked through the grand corridors. He could hear the muttered words he could not understand, but knew were filled with venom. Yet he never let it distract him. His duty remained clear. Protect the heir. Protect the queen's trust. But fate struck again. It began in the middle of a council gathering. The chamber was filled with nobles, their robes shimmering with jeweled light, their voices clashing as they argued about the war, about resources, about the queen's decisions. Daniel stood at his usual place behind the child, silent but alert. Suddenly, the chamber doors burst open. A group of armed figures stormed inside, their armor darker than the queen's guards. They were not assassins in masks this time. They were soldiers, loyal not to Serenia but to the nobles who sought to remove her. Chaos erupted. The nobles screamed, some fleeing, others shouting commands. The queen rose at once, her crown blazing under the torchlight. "Treachery!" she cried, her voice shaking the walls. Daniel reacted instantly. He pulled the heir into his arms and shielded them with his body as blades clashed across the chamber. The rebels rushed forward, their eyes filled with hate, not just for the queen but for the human who stood by her side. One soldier lunged at Daniel. He blocked the strike with his arm, pain tearing through him, but he refused to let go of the Yao child. Another swung from the side and Daniel kicked hard, knocking the attacker back. The heir cried out, clinging to him as the chamber became a battlefield. Guards loyal to the queen fought desperately, but the rebels outnumbered them. For every enemy that fell, 2 more took their place. The throne room shook with the sound of metal against stone, with shouts and screams that filled the air. Daniel knew he could not keep running. He had to stand his ground. He placed the heir behind the throne, whispering quickly, "Stay hidden, don't move." The child's eyes filled with tears, but they nodded, trusting him completely. Then Daniel turned and faced the storm. He fought, with everything left in him. His blade flashed, striking against enemy steel. His fists and boots moved with the rhythm of survival. He took cuts and bruises, but he never stepped back. Every strike he made was not for himself, but for the small life he had sworn to protect. Above the chaos, the queen's voice rang out again, her commands sharp and unyielding. She fought too, her own blade gleaming with the light of her crown. She was no distant ruler now. She was a warrior queen defending her throne with fury. But the rebels pressed harder. One of them broke through the guards and charged at the hidden child. Daniel's heart dropped. Without a second thought, he threw himself across the chamber, slamming into the attacker just as the blade was raised. The two crashed to the floor, struggling fiercely. Daniel's strength was fading, his body heavy with wounds. But he refused to let go. With one final push, he drove the attacker back and rose to his feet again. He stood before the air, arms spread wide, his body marked with blood and sweat. "You'll never touch them," he growled. The rebels hesitated. For a moment, silence fell. Even in the chaos, they saw it. The human who stood like an unbreakable wall before the queen's blood. Then the tide turned. Reinforcements stormed the chamber, guards who had rushed from the outer halls. They cut through the rebels with precision, forcing them back. One by one, the traitors fell or surrendered. The chamber slowly grew quiet, the floor littered with weapons and broken pride. Daniel swayed on his feet, his strength nearly gone. But when the air ran to him, throwing small arms around his waist, he steadied himself. He knelt, holding the child close, whispering words of comfort he barely had breath to speak. The queen stepped forward. Her crown gleamed, her face fierce, yet softened by relief. She looked at the human who had once been a stranger, now standing bloodied but unbroken before her throne. Her heart, long shielded by walls of duty, could no longer deny the truth. She raised her voice so all in the chamber could hear. "Hear me, court of mine," she declared. "This human risked his life again for my child, for my throne, for me. You call him outsider, you call him unworthy, but I call him protector. I call him more than that." The nobles gasped. Whispers rose, filling the air like a storm. The queen's gaze locked on Daniel. Her voice dropped, softer but sharper in meaning. "From this day he is mine. He is bound to this throne, to this bloodline. No voice, no blade will take him from us." The chamber fell silent. None dared to challenge her. Her word was law. Daniel looked at her, stunned. He had not asked for power nor for titles. All he wanted was to keep a promise to a child. Yet now the queen herself had claimed him, not as prisoner, not even as soldier, but as someone who belonged beside her. The air smiled through their tears, clutching his hand tightly. And for the first time since the war had begun, Daniel felt something stronger than fear. He felt a place, a purpose, a bond that reached beyond species, beyond duty. That night the palace was cleansed of traitors. Guards swore loyalty anew. The nobles bowed low, some in fear, some in grudging respect. And in the center of it all stood Daniel, once a lost soldier, now protector of a queen and her heir. When he finally rested, his body aching but his spirit strong, Serenia came to him in private. She stood without her crown, without the weight of her throne, simply as a woman who had nearly lost everything. "You have given me more than loyalty," she said quietly. "You have given me hope." Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady though, soft. "I only did what was right." She stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. "And that is why you will never stand alone again." The war outside still raged. Many battles remained to be fought. But inside the walls of the Queen's palace, a new chapter had begun. A human soldier had saved a child, and in doing so, had changed the heart of a queen. And no matter what storms lay ahead, that bond would remain unbroken.